Okay, we'll probably get started. It's just a minute after 12 o'clock, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining this National Association of Enabling Educators webinar. And the topic today is the Southern Cross University 6-week teaching and learning model, student and tutors experiences, and how you engage students in the learning process. But Susie and Liz will talk a little bit more about the topic and take care of the actual webinar today. If you're engaging in social media, we encourage you to use the hashtag NAEEAWS and our association Twitter hashtag or Twitter handle is at 01NAEEA. And we encourage you to use that in your social media posts. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we meet today. I know that today we have participants from different parts of Australia, as well as many other countries. So although we are meeting online, we are still physically on traditional lands. As we continue to walk in the first footprints of Aboriginal people, no matter where we are on this land, we recognize the important role the traditional elders have played in education, in research, and knowledge creation. Thus, I would like to respectfully acknowledge all elders and officially welcome everyone to this session. I would also like to encourage you to introduce yourself using the chat by acknowledging the lands from which you are joining us today. Just a couple of logistics and protocols about the webinar today. As I mentioned earlier on, you are unable to unmute yourself just at the moment, but we will allow you to unmute yourself a little bit later on when we get towards the Q&A session. But you're welcome to post any questions, ideas, suggestions, etc., comments in the chat, and we will be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation. As I mentioned just now, we will have some time for Q&A in the end as well, so you will be able to unmute yourself during that time as well. Today's presentation will be done by Susie Syme, and Susie is the Associate Dean Education at the Southern Cross University College at the Southern Cross University and the coordinator of the Preparing for Success program. The PSP was one of the first programs at Southern Cross to transition into the new 6-week model. Susie shares some key learnings of the experience from both students and staff perspectives. Susie is also involved with several scholarship of teaching and learning projects which document the transition process and impact of the new model on student success and learning experience. Liz Good is a lecturer on secondment from the SCU College to the Academic Portfolio Office, where her role is leading communities of practice in the university's new delivery model. Liz was part of the team that piloted the first courses in the new model in 2021, including the redesign of several SCU colleges' PSP units. She also co-designed and taught a new academic communication unit for the Bachelor of Business and Enterprise in the new model. And on that point, I would stop sharing and invite Liz and Susie to take over.
Thank you, Pranesh. Well, we're both very excited to be sharing our experiences of the new 6-week model at Southern Cross University, and in particular, the impact of the model on our students in our enabling program, the Preparing for Success program, with a focus on student engagement and retention. So I'm going to hand over to Liz, who's going to give an introduction to the university, Southern Cross University, and to some key principles underpinning the model.
Hi everyone, and thanks very much, Susie. Thanks for coming to our webinar today. Just to give you a bit of context around this 6-week model initiative that we're talking about, SCU's enabling program is usually outside of COVID restrictions, delivered across the university's 3 main campuses, which many of you might be aware of. So we have campuses at Lismore on the Gold Coast and also Coffs Harbour, and our PSP program is usually delivered across those campuses as well as in online mode. So, like many universities, Our enabling program has traditionally been offered in a 12-week session format, so with 3 sessions spread out across the calendar year. Between 2021 and 2023, the university is rolling out a new model of delivery called the Southern Cross model, and this divides the academic calendar year into 6 terms of 6 teaching weeks each. So in this new model, students will study just 1 or 2 units at a time in a 6-week term, and it's a staged transition. So the PSP was one of the first courses to move across into the new model this year, so we're in the pilot group. But most faculties will move across in 2022, and by 2023, all courses across the university will be delivered in the Southern Cross model. So we've tried to remain really cognizant and really clear that this new model isn't merely an operational transition, and it's not just a calendar change. So it's not about compression or intensiveness and just sort of squashing 12 weeks of content into 6 weeks. But we're framing it and really trying to achieve a transformation and revitalisation of pedagogy across the institution with active, guided and authentic learning at its core. So there are, as you can see on the slide, 3 main elements to teaching and learning in the Southern Cross model. The first is that content has been modularised into typically 6 online modules that students self-access over a 6-week term. And these are media rich, they're interactive and responsive, and they give students feedback that allows them to gauge their learning before and after they come to classes. So there are scheduled classes, typically 2 per week for each unit, that are interactive and guided. And the assessments are designed for student learning and success. They're intended to be authentic, so linked to the real world, interlinked, so scaffolded, cumulative and progressive, and manageable for both students and staff over a 6-week period. And all of these aspects are closely connected to the unit learning outcomes, of course. So that's a bit of context about the model, and I'll hand back now to Susie to talk specifically about the PSP.
Thanks, Liz. Well, the Preparing for Success program, the PSP, as Liz has already mentioned, is normally taught across 3 campuses and online. At the moment, it's all taught online. We typically have between 300 and 500 students enrolled for the 6-week study period, or term as they're going to be called. Students complete 4 units. 3 of those are core and 1 is an elective. So they can complete those 4 units full-time if they do 2 per 6-week term. So that would be over 12 weeks, or they can elect to do it part-time. So that could take up to a year to complete the 4 units. So they can choose to study online, on campus, or to do a blend of on campus and online. So here are the 3 core units. So our very first one, Managing Your Study, as the title suggests, is all about managing their, learning some strategies of how to manage their time, how to manage themselves, how to bring their families or communities along for the learning journey, because often they've got changed roles and responsibilities once they study, and really helping them really build up a toolbox, if you like, of learning strategies of how to learn at uni, how to do uni. That's what one of our students in their testimonial called it. So it's really a foundation unit for building up success in their transition to their undergraduate programs. The second unit there, Communicating at University, is all about writing an essay. So they learn not only how to write an essay, but academic integrity is very much embedded within that unit. And I'll talk about the assessments a little bit later on, but it is all about planning an essay. A lot of them have never actually planned anything. They've just written what comes out of their heads. So they learn how to actually plan and sequence and structure an essay properly, and also use scholarly sources so that they're learning how to think critically and come to an informed argument. The third unit, Applying Quantitative Concepts, is our core foundation maths unit. So we do start fairly right at the beginning, really, around primary school level, maybe, year 3, year 4, because we find that a lot of our students have moved around, they've missed key concepts, they might have had a teacher they didn't get on with. So it's better to just start from the beginning and build up. It is intense because they're building up fairly quickly. The assessments, as I would elaborate on, are very much problem-based assessments as well, linking to real-world scenarios. So the 2 electives, so they choose an elective based on where they think they're going in their undergraduate programs. So they've got a science elective, which is very much foundation science topics, so physics, chemistry, and biology, and it's all about writing a report as well. Or they can choose the issues and inquiry in arts and business. So they might be going into creative arts or studying business, for example. They would choose this one. And this is a really kind of inspiring topic about its sustainability. It's very, encourages them to use their critical thinking skills, and it's also report writing. So that's the main skill, that the learning outcome that we want them to have at the end. So I'll hand over to Liz.
Okay, so we're going to give you a bit of an overview and a bit of an insight into what some of these modules look like that we've designed for a couple of the units in the PSP. But just to sort of introduce some of the principles that we had in mind as we were designing these modules. Across the university, we've put through some policy changes for our assessment, teaching and learning policy, and then developed alongside that these 6 core tenets for unit module design to help guide unit designers in thinking about how to actually go about modularizing their self-access material for the new model. So you can see those 6 tenets here, and what we're really trying to encourage staff to do is to, when they're thinking about this new curriculum that they're going to release in the new model, to focus very much on the need to know rather than the nice to know, and where things are nice to know, to make sure that that is really clearly signposted. So we want students to have a really focused learning experience. Secondly, careful thought is given to the sequencing of material and the way that students are guided and scaffolded in a really cohesive way through the curriculum. Modules are also designed to be media rich, which doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be overly flashy, but it does mean a variety of instructional approaches beyond just text on a page. So a mix of video, a mix of graphics, audio, and text, of course. Modules are also designed to be interactive and responsive. So we want students to actually do things rather than just read things on a page, and to get feedback that they can use to help gauge their learning along the way. Links between assessments, online materials and class activities are signposted really clearly to give the material value and purpose. And finally, we hope that modules encourage communities of inquiry through teacher presence, and also encouraging student-to-student interaction in discussion and activities. So these are the 6 core tenets that we drew upon when designing our modules. So I'll just stop sharing that for a moment and then bring up an actual module. Okay, so this is one of our units. It's the science elective, and so you can see that the material is quite nicely chunked into 6 hopefully attractive looking learning packages. And just to give you a quick overview of what they look like, this is in the Blackboard Learning Management System, and we use H5P to make these little interactives throughout. So you can see it's quite chunked. The content is in quite digestible little parts, and throughout we aim to have students to actually click and do things that are more than just reading on the page, to digest that information. So little hotspot activities for them to click and bring up information. There's another example here as well. And then following these chunks of material, there is usually some kind of interactive or activity that asks students to test themselves, to review what they know, to see if they can identify things that they're picking up and things that they might need to go back and review as well. So little drag and drop, that's probably wrong, but little drag and drop activities that they can do and then check and see how they're going, and go back and do as many times as they like in this self-access format. There's videos, there's graphics to follow up on things that happen in the video. And I think it's down here. There's a video and a graphic, and then a little activity for them to follow up on what they've learned through that video. So there's lots of different interactives. You can see here's a flashcard where they need to type in their answer and check and see how they're going, and move through a series of those. And again, you can see that the content is chunked throughout, so that students aren't just reading, but they're thinking about and doing and reviewing and getting some feedback all along the way. So that's the science elective. To give you a bit of an idea of what a writing unit looks like, this is communicating at university, one of the core units. And you can see here the modules are quite carefully scaffolded. So each one builds upon the one before. And they're also tied really closely to the assessment tasks. So an assessment occurs here in week 1, and everything that they need to know for that is contained in module 1, and so forth as they move throughout the unit. So what that looks like in this unit, again, quite carefully sort of chunked and sequenced materials. Here's another type of activity, just as a very quick warm up, a little quiz where they can again check and see if they're kind of on the right track in how they're interpreting the material. Another drag and drop activity, this time in relation to introduction paragraphs. There's opportunities for reflection and then to see if you're on track with your reflecting on the content. Another drag and drop activity. So similar sorts of interactives, but you can see how they apply in this case, both to a science and more quantitative subject matter, and here in relation to writing as well. This is a little drag and drop or ordering activity. Opportunities to pause after really major or key concepts have been covered. And then here is an example of a video followed with a little quiz, a series of quiz questions. So that's 2 of the online modules that we put together. I'll just stop sharing that and go back to the slides now. Okay, we have collected some feedback from students, and just really quickly, we'll expand upon this later as well, but students like videos that stop and ask them questions, those visual activities where they work different parts of their brain rather than just reading material, flashcards and drag and drop activities. So they do like those little interactives that occur throughout the modules. And it's important to point out that they're designed so that students can access them on mobile phones as well. So those things you've just seen, they will show up okay on mobile phones, which is important for some of our students also. Okay, so I'll pass back to Susie now to talk a little bit.
Thanks, Liz. Beautiful job there. Okay, so we're looking similarly to the unit design. We've also got 6 principles here for assessment design. So all our assessments, have these principles underpinning them. So I guess the first one is really making sure that the assessments are linked to the learning outcomes. We're looking at what students can do and how they're going to demonstrate what they've understood. So clear alignment there. Authenticity. We really like the fact that our assessments are really based on, they're meaningful and they're relevant, and often they're problem solving, or they might be writing a report which is based on a real life issue. So they can actually see just how relevant these assessments are. The manageability and the volume and timing is something that's really come up in the 6-week, period of time. So we've had to, just as Liz has said, we've had to really kind of focus on exactly what they need to be able to do and demonstrate what they can do. So it's not about, what would be nice to have. It's about what do we really need here, so that students have a very clear line of sight of how these assessments are building up, and they're clearly scaffolded and interlinked, as we can see down the bottom here, so that by the time they finish the term, they can really demonstrate some key skills in that final assessment. So the scaffolding you'll see in the assessments when I show you that they are very much building on each other. And academic integrity is very much embedded within those assessments as well. Now, the signposting is really important for our enabling students. We make the connections ourselves, but we find that we have to really help students see how everything is interlinked, and that there's a purpose to these assessments. And the purpose is that they're clearly linked to these learning outcomes, and that, that they're going to be able to demonstrate the skills that they've learnt in a very practical and real way. So here are 2 of our core units, managing your study and communicating at university. So these are the 3 assessments that we have for each of these subjects, these units. So the very first assessment is really practical in nature. So for managing your study, we ask students to actually go into the first topic, the first module, and download, and we'll do the activities around time management and self-management, and then download a template from the module to work out their weekly plan of their time. So this is the point where some of them look at their time and they realize that they're not actually going to be able to fit in 2 subjects with everything else that they've got on, and then they withdraw before the census date. But it's a very practical tool for them to be doing, and they also do reflections on this. So they do 50 to 80 words reflections on what they've discovered about themselves as a learner and how they're going to manage their time for study success. So you'll see in the other one, there's a quiz. So this quiz is all about academic integrity. So it is very early on, it's the end of week 1. But we find having these assessments at the end of week 1 actually crucial, because we want to get students engaged and motivated very early on, because there's only 6 weeks. So they need to get going and they need to get engaged with the modules, and they need to work their way around the what we call the learning site, study management system, whatever it is in your universities. But we find it very important that they get going with this, because otherwise it's all getting too late. So this quiz that they do on academic integrity has had really significant benefits for our students. We used to get quite a few academic integrity issues with the plan and the essay, and now there's like between 0 and 1 case of academic integrity. So it really has worked very well, and it works in conjunction, or in complementing a university module as well at the same time. So you'll see in week 3 for managing your study, they have a mind map. So the mind map is actually helping students to develop the skill of getting their ideas out on a page and starting to learn how to structure their ideas. And it's also a critical evaluation skill as well that they're practicing here, because they're looking at strengths and weaknesses of particular learning strategies and evaluating those. Now that mind map actually builds on the assessment in week 4 of the other unit. So this one in week 4, they've got an essay plan. So the essay plan is all about actually working out their 3 key points that they're going to argue, learning how to build in some referencing as well, and building in some references that they've got to support those points, drafting up a couple of paragraphs and a reference list, which they will get feedback on, and then they'll use that for their final essay. So you can see that the assessments are not only scaffolded between, in the unit, but they're also scaffolded across the unit. So they're building on each other and they're interconnected there. And then each of the units has a final essay at the end where they're drawing all together what they've learned. So in this one, managing your study, they're going to use their mind map for those 2 learning strategies, and then they're going to add another 2 for their final essay. In the communicating at university one, they use the feedback from their essay plan to finish off writing their critical essay, where they will include a counter argument. So they're really building on their critical thinking skills here and using the scholarly sources to come to an informed view of informed argument. So how does this all impact on, so key learnings for the tutors. So I guess the key learnings really is that these assessments have to be focused, and they have to be clearly aligned to the content that is taught in the tutorials, but also in the self-access modules. And all of that needs to be clearly signposted to the students. And of course, we want students to be engaged and interacting both in class and with the self-access modules. So for the tutors and the people in charge of the units, the unit assessors, something that's really come out very clearly is about the timing of assessment. So, especially if students are doing both units, it's not a good idea to have 2 assessments due in the middle, right on, in week 3. So we found having week 3 and then the other one in week 4 a better structure for them. So we want to make sure that students have time in class to actually, prepare for these assessments and to use the feedback that they've got from their assessments. And just in terms of managing all of this, the marking and the markers and everything, because it is a much tighter turnaround, it's a 7-day turnaround, it's actually super important to make sure that the marking team can actually mark within the 7-day turnaround. And we've found, within our units that, between 50 to 55 assessments per marker is really the maximum load that you could expect a marker to be able to do and give adequate feedback on the assessments. So the next slide is all about our success rate. So you'll see here that the success has substantially increased for those 2 core units and actually for all 5 units. So I'm just showing you these ones here. So they've increased up to 79%. And as we know, across the sector, the success rates are, we can sort of look at 50 to 60% because of the fail rate or the dropout rate or students just not participating. In our case at Southern Cross, we have actually introduced a new rule, which means that students who do not put their first assessment in this enabling program, they are unenrolled out of the course. So there's multiple points of contact. They're told when they enroll in the course that this is what's going to happen, and it's all clearly signposted that that's what will happen. So that, of course, has impacted the success rate. So this is a bit of a disclosure here. But I have done the numbers, and even if those students were included in these success rates, the success rates are still higher. So the success rates for these 2 units would be 71% if we included those students that were unenrolled. So it's still higher than it was. So, which is suggesting that students are actually finding the 6-week term beneficial for their learning. So this slide here is looking at the engagement of students with the modules. So this is one of the modules, the Communicating at University that Liz showed you before. And you'll see here that there were over 6,000 clicks on this module for week 3. So there were 330 students, 331, and just over 6,000 clicks. So that's a lot of clicks. So that sort of suggests that they are getting onto these study guide modules and really having a look at them. With this data, we couldn't actually see how long they stayed on the module or which activities they looked at, but it just gives us an indication that they are actually engaging with the material, which is what we want. So this is going to actually show a video now, one of our students. It's a testimonial, and then also complement this with some student feedback from focus groups. So what do the students think really about all this 6-week module? So here we go from Jasper.
So the Southern Cross model is great. It's really worked for how I've wanted to approach uni, and I know a lot of other people enjoying the 6-week term model. It's a good way to get in and get everything done in a manageable way. I think the 6-week course has been great. With in between the first 2 units and my second 2 units, there's been a gap of I think 2 weeks or so, and that was amazing. I was able to go and do all the things that I had planned and see people and get prepared for my next 2 units. The learning within the units is a lot more in-depth as you have to go into it a lot faster, but I think that works as it engages you immediately. Yeah, with the assignments and the workload, it's all, like I said, very manageable, I feel. My aim after the Pathway course is to enrol into the Contemporary Music course here at Southern Cross and further my own music personally, but also hopefully go into the world of music and find a career for myself there. The 6-week model of the PSP course is one of the reasons why I chose it. So
Okay, So we have run some focus groups as well with students from across the campuses and also with some online students. So to give you a bit of an idea of some of the data that's emerging from that, focus and manageability was one of the really key things that seems to come up again and again. We did have a few students who had attempted PSP earlier in the 12-week mode and then they'd come back to do it again in the 6-week mode. A comment from one of those students was that they felt a great sense of relief because they found it quite difficult juggling 4 units at a time. So that did come up quite a lot, that students really appreciated being able to just focus in and do a focused deep dive on just 2 units at a time rather than juggling 4 units and often 4 assessments at a time. Several students also talked about it just gave them a sense of having a focus point. They knew, okay, I'm here to do my 1 unit or my 2 units. I know what my timetable is. Things aren't pushed out too far in advance. I can see where the finish line is. I can see where the milestones are. And this is a really manageable thing that I can work into my life. So focus and manageability were probably the top 2 themes that have been emerging from our focus group data so far. Secondly, students talked about how they actually found it quite motivating and it built their confidence having just 2 units at a time and having those shortened deadlines. So we have found that it's not always a productive or a positive thing to have assessments due a long time in the future. So students have talked about, as long as it's appropriately spaced and they're not overloaded with assessments, it's kind of a healthy sense of urgency that they found really motivating and helped them to avoid the procrastination that otherwise can sometimes come when you feel, I've got, 3 or 4 weeks for that next assessment. And it really gives students a chance to refresh as well between units and a sense of achievement, which is something that we were really, really happy to see. So as assessments happen within these units, it's a sense of, okay, tick, tick, I'm doing it and I'm achieving it. And I can see that really quickly and I can see that continually throughout my enrollment. And then after 6 weeks, they have those 1 or 2 units under their belt. So there's a real sense of achievement and motivation that we found as well. Something that's really important, I think, to highlight, we haven't found that this unit has compromised learning or compromised the achievement of learning outcomes. So students report being very engaged by the combination of the media-rich interactive responsive modules and the guided active class activities as well that extend them beyond the types of concepts and skills they're learning about in the modules. So provided that design is sort of very complementary, we found that it engages students, it scaffolds their learning really effectively, and it gives them that greater sense of confidence. Several students spoke about being able to walk into their classes and they feel like they are at least a little bit familiar with some of the terms and ideas, and that really helped them to build their sense of confidence. And then with the classes, it's really that social aspect that's emerged as the real highlight of those, the opportunity to get together with other students and look around the room, whether that be virtual or on campus, feel like they're not alone in potentially not understanding this or that, and being able to sit around and do things like brainstorm together, discuss things and throw around ideas and different perspectives. So that social aspect of the classes has emerged as a really positive thing about this model. There have been some challenges that have been surfaced as well. So while none of the things that came up have been insurmountable or dire, they do give us food for thought and some considerations to take forward. So the first is that the timing of assessments is really, really critical, as Susie explained earlier. So it's important to not overload students with assessments. Where possible, scaffold the assessments so they're not coming into a new discrete standalone task every time they sit down to look at an assessment task, but they build upon each other in really meaningful ways that enable some meaningful formative feedback along the way also. And it's important to give students enough time to integrate that feedback. And that becomes easier when they're just doing 1 unit or 2 units at a time, even though there might be just a 2-week break between assessments. They're not splitting their attention over 3 or 4 units. It's just those 1 or 2 that they need to focus in on. It was also mentioned that if you have dips or hiccups, as many of our students do have, that can have a big effect because it does put you behind a little more quickly. The trade-off though, again, is that instead of being behind in 4 units, you only need to worry about 1 or 2. So there is that trade-off. Nonetheless, we found it's important to encourage that early and consistent access through those early assessment tasks that Susie mentioned earlier, and then to follow up with students who need extra time or other supportive measures as soon as possible. And we also try to be flexible where we can be as well. So at the end of these focus groups, we have asked students to give us one word to summarise their experiences, and they've all been really highly positive, as you can see from that collection of words on the screen. So in looking overall at the data, I think one of the really great things for us is that it crystallises that the model has enabled these positive experiences that really do support learning, confidence and capability, which is very much what we're hoping to achieve in our program, as with all of yours, I'm sure. So I think that brings us to the end, and I'll just go back to Susie if you'd like to make any further comments, and then yeah, look forward to your questions.
Yes, thanks, Liz. Wonderful. We do have some questions in the chat box, so I could start with some of these about census date. So census date at Southern Cross for the 6-week term is the Monday of week 3. So when we unenroll our students, that they've already had 2 weeks, so that's 1/3 of the course. So if they haven't engaged in those 2 weeks, they're well and truly behind. So yeah, so that's that question. We've got here, if they fail a unit, can they do it again? Yes, they can. We have 3 entry points per year. So they would have to wait 6 weeks before they would be able to do that unit again, or 8 weeks, but they can, and they're encouraged to do that again. Yeah. And then what else? Are we hoping to roll out the 6-week model across more units? Liz says, yes, we are. So Liz, do you want to do an update with that? I mean, it is being rolled out across the whole university. So 2022, most degrees will be rolled out, and 2023 will be all the science degrees. So I think that's right. Is that, Liz? Yeah, pretty much.
So there's 4 courses in the model at the moment in 2021, including the PSP. Next year, most of the other faculties will move into the model as well, except for the Faculty of Health. And the Faculty of Health will move over in 2023. So by 2023, all courses across the university will be in the new model.
Yeah. So there's a question about online classes. So the model is, which we haven't had for these 2 units, I have to say, but the model of teaching and learning will be a 1-hour online workshop, interactive workshop, with a 2-hour interactive tutorial. So the interactive tutorial can be on campus or online. So that's going to be the model of class learning for the whole university with this model. So what has worked really well in our 6-week transition to uni course, which is a 6-week course run in January for students who didn't quite get the HR that they wanted to get into their degree. So they come to us for 6 weeks for a 6-week online course of two units. And after they complete those 2 units, they can get into their degree course. What has worked well there is to have a 1-hour assessment workshop. So the whole 1 hour is really about modeling exemplars from different assessments and working through those in groups or in pairs, making sure that students understand the assessment instructions, of course, and looking at their feedback from their first assessment and making sure that they've understood it and how they might use it in their next one. And looking at some exemplars, unpacking exemplars of past papers. So that assessment workshop works really well in that 6-week course. And that's what we'll be doing with the Preparing for Success program units as well. And then the 2-hour tutorial is very much interactive, but nothing has changed there. Our classes are all interactive, whether they're online or on campus. So I don't know if, I mean, people can unmute now, is that right? And ask the questions.
Yeah, that's right. That is correct.
Well, first,
first of all, thank you very much, Susie and Liz. That was quite informative. Actually, I certainly found it informative, and some of the comments that was coming in the chat, I think many people found some of your ideas quite very informative, but also engaging and revealing in many ways as well. There was a couple of questions that before I go on, yes, you are able to unmute yourself if you want to. Please put up your hand using the buttons there so we can see that you are interested in asking a question. But before we pass on to people to ask questions, there was a question sitting, I think it was from David, but also a comment that sort of flowed in through various different comments that was coming in the chat, and that was about some of the units that you talked about, particularly in your PSP, can often be very skills based. How does that compare with something in a discipline based unit that can be quite content based kind of thing? And how does the 6 weeks model or the 12 weeks model translate into the 6 weeks model, and any particular challenges that you've come across translating the two, between the two?
Okay, well, I can start if you like, and then Liz can add in. I think the key thing with all of this, which is what Liz talked about right at the beginning, was a real kind of rethinking of curriculum content. So it's not about compressing 12 weeks of content into 6 weeks. It's about having a really good look at the curriculum and exactly what content you want students to be able to understand and apply, So that's the key message there about the 6 week model.
Yeah, I think constructive alignment is emerging as something that's really, really important when they're sitting down to think about their units, to go from, for us, this isn't as relevant, but your graduate attributes to your unit learning outcomes, to your assessment tasks, and then to what you want to cover in your modules. So that alignment has become really important, and encouraging people to think about, I know Faculty Business Law and Arts have got this little phrase flying around, minimal viable content. What's the minimal viable content that I need to enable students to achieve these learning outcomes? So it's a little bit of a balance, but that's a really important starting point, I think. And then within the modules themselves, if you've got what has typically been a very content heavy unit, it's becoming very important to think about the media richness and the interactivity and the responsiveness. So to get away from very long stretches of text, textbooks and things like that, and to think about whether there are more varied and creative ways that you can present key concepts, key ideas, ways that you can engage students in talking about and thinking about those concepts and ideas, and to really try and harness that sort of active learning and responsive learning that's then followed up in the classes where they apply some of the things that they've been learning in more extended ways. So, yeah.
That's really good, actually. I really like this whole concept of minimal viable content kind of thing. It really resonates with me and some of my ideas about teaching and learning as well. There's another question from Michelle in the chat about staff workload issues. I'm not sure if you can see the question in the chat, Susie and Liz.
Yes, I can.
Did you want to address that?
I was just thinking back to just the last topic as well, which it also has an impact on the amount of readings. So that's sort of another thing, another area that we've been looking at as well, that it's no good, giving people hundreds of pages of readings to do each week, because they're just not going to manage that. So it is really, really, drilling down and looking at exactly what it is that you want them to be able to do and understand. How many students does each tutor have at any one time? Well, I guess that varies to what their workload is. So, but most of the time they'll have, one unit that they'll be either running or teaching. So that one unit could have maybe 350 students in it. So one of our electives is quite small, the arts and business one, so there might only be 60 or 70 students in that one, but the core units generally have more than that. So maybe at the moment there's 240, I think, in the 2 core units. Confirm the assessment feedback turnaround time. So that is 7 days. So that is the university policy, that the marking turnaround is 7 days. So it means, as the coordinator or the person in charge of the unit, you have to really make sure that you have enough markers that are on board and that can complete that marking in the appropriate time. And how many subjects might they be teaching? Maximum 2. Yeah, that's it.
There's a question in the chat also from Karen about your student demographics, I think.
Our demographics? Well, the average age is around 25, which always surprised me, I have to say, because I look at our classes and I think, oh, is that? But it is 25. And our demographics on each campus are quite different, actually. So the Coffs Harbour campus, and I think Liz, you might add there, I don't know, but every time I visit there, they do seem to be a younger cohort, you know, more generally straight from school. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know why that is, particularly in my region, but yeah, they do tend to be sort of around 1920 with a handful of more mature age students.
And then up at the Gold Coast, I mean, I know it's a bit of a stereotype, but they do tend to be more affluent, I would say. It just seems to come across like that. And they're very motivated and very keen. They know exactly where they're going and what they want and what they want to do. And there's more of them at the Gold Coast as well. So it's a bigger cohort there. And their average age there would be around 25. But we also get mature age people, you know, older people in their 40s, you know, 50s, wanting, you know, they've had a career. I don't know, they've been doing things in whatever it might be in the bank or as in aged care or whatever it might be. And they really want a chance to pursue their career of passion. So does that answer your question? Yeah.
There's a couple of other questions that has come in the chat.
Reasonable
One from
extensions, yeah, reasonable extensions, absolutely. So we do have students with complex issues going on in their lives, and of course, you know, if they have a medical issue or something else going on, of course, we can give extensions. And we can come up with a reasonable plan for them. But, you know, as Liz has alluded to, because they're only doing 1 or 2 units at a time, you know, their workload is a lot more manageable, you know, really, and they can see the end in sight. So, you know, we find that, you know, giving the extensions works well. So, and I think we actually have less extensions than we had before, because, you know, they're getting going with it in week 1 and they know what's involved and they can see the end in sight. And so there seems to be less extensions involved. Is there a second academic communication unit? No. So these are just the 5 units that we offer in our enabling program. That's it. And then they can go into their undergraduate degree. So the word count and volume of assessment has been reduced. That's right. Yes. So the word count for the final essay, especially for the communicating and for the report writing, that's been reduced to 1,200 words. So, and the volume has also been reduced. So in managing your study, for example, we used to have a group work assessment, and we found that was a nice to do kind of assessment, if you like. So we've had to take that one out. It just took too much time organizing them all, getting them going, teaching the strategies and doing the actual group work. So that's been taken out. And in the communicating at university, they used to do an annotated bibliography as well. And we've removed that too. So the annotated, you know, they actually used to get a little bit confused with that one because of having the reference at the start and the actual skills that were involved with that. So we do an annotated, we do practice those skills in class. So they do get to do that, but they just don't do it for an assessment. So yes, we have reduced the assessments. And it actually means that, you know, there's a much clearer scaffolding in place, so students can see exactly how each assessment builds on the next one and how they're linked to the content as well.
There's another question from Roger about who does the redevelopment work for each unit. Is it a central unit or the academic team? And have you got any feedback from your teaching staff? I think this is particularly around workload as they transition to the new model.
Right, yeah. Well, Liz, of course, works in the academic portfolio office, so you can talk to the work that you do. But in terms of organising all of this, that was my job to do that. And we worked very closely with our Centre of Teaching and Learning, who are absolutely amazing people. They've got designers and curriculum people, all of that expertise. So it was kind of a well-organized kind of process, if you like, of working out who was going to do what, the roles and responsibilities, a timeline, mini deadlines, and buddying up the people that were involved with the transition with an expert person in the Centre of Teaching and Learning. So yeah, so the redevelopment work really was with the tutors, and sometimes with what we call the unit assessors, the people in charge of the unit, and then in collaboration with the Centre of Teaching and Learning. And then this was all backed up with this, amazing work that Liz has done in the academic portfolio office with these principles and tenets and examples and there's modules on our Southern Cross website to help the team actually understand how to do all of this. And there's been workshops and all sorts of things. I don't know, Liz, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I guess just to say it is a well-scoped process. So
Yeah.
Teaching and Learning have expanded their staff quite significantly, and they're working with each faculty to scope out their requirements in a way that is really tightly bound to the constructive alignment process. So most or every course is going through a constructive alignment process, working with the Centre for Teaching and Learning, which will scope out the unit learning outcomes, the assessment tasks, what they think their modules are going to be, and then that feeds into a more detailed process where teams, including an academic practice project lead from Centre for Teaching and Learning, will work with small teams of staff to actually go about writing, designing, and then developing their modules and their class materials and their assessments. So it's a huge job across the university, but it is sort of being managed with the CTL as being a bit of a linchpin to help that happen.
That's good. Thank you very much for that. Does anybody have any other questions? We probably have time for maybe a couple of more if anybody's got any. As I mentioned earlier on, you are able to unmute yourself if that's what you want to do, and you're welcome to unmute and ask your questions that way also, or use the chat, whichever works for you.
Can I just mention as well, Annette, about assessment tasks, given how important we found that this has been to the success of the model, and the university has just put through a policy change that limits assessments to 3 per unit. So across the 6-week period, a unit will have 3 or 2 assessments. So that's really an attempt to make sure that the assessment load is manageable across that 6-week period.
Mm.
There's a question that's just come up in the chat from Amita. Has it had an impact on the number of subjects in the revitalized courses? I think I suspect it's to do with has there been an increase in the number of subjects? And I think I can get the gist of that question. So if a content unit is reducing from a 12-week to a 6-week, is there a motivation within some disciplines to double up on units, on subjects? I'm not sure.
There's actually a parallel project happening around the university at the moment to reduce the number of units that we offer. So there's very much an attempt to make sure we don't end up duplicating, splitting in half, just having hundreds of kind of redundant or repetitive units. So yeah, there is this parallel project going on to hopefully actually reduce the number of units that we used to have under the 12-week model. We'll hopefully have even less under the 6-week.
Yeah, there's a whole review on that going on, looking at exactly what we're offering. Yeah.
There's another question from Anna in the chat. It's a pretty long one, so I'll let Liz and Susie read that and respond accordingly if you want to do that.
Measure you share the usual. I'm not quite sure. Anna, can you?
There we go.
I know, I was just wondering when you showed a slide about success.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, is that pass fail, you know, when
Yes, yes,
yep. Okay, well that's
yeah.
good, because that shows also that they're doing well academically. It's not just that they're retained.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and our fail rate really, honestly, you know, I mean, it says 79%, so that's 21% didn't pass that unit. But really, out of that 21%, it would be a handful of people who actually completed the whole unit, all the assessments, put them all in and failed. Maybe three to five students out of 340, or however many there were there. The rest of them don't complete, just like we all know in the sector that something happens in their lives and they just don't get to finish that last assessment, which is unfortunate. But I think, you know, withdrawing them just before census, that withdrawal process, if they don't get that first assessment in at the end of week 1, has had an impact. And it just saves a lot of time, you know, for the tutors wondering what's happened to them and following up and all of this kind of thing, and just helps them regroup and refocus, because a lot of them don't realize, I think, you know, that they're going to be kept on the books. So I think it helps them to see that, no, they've actually got to be accountable here. If they want to continue, they're going to have to re-enroll. So it just helps to, you know, keep it contained. And yeah. So re-number of assessment, what is your view on the difference between having a few big assessments versus a high number of small assessments? Well, I guess the main thing that I would say about assessments is, one, that we have an early stakes meaningful assessment, which builds confidence and motivation. So that early stakes assessment is really key, I think, to getting students engaged and motivated and getting into the study guide modules and accessing that and seeing that those study guide modules are clearly linked to their assessments and that they're relevant and practical and useful, you know. And then that middle assessment, assessment 2, is always scaffolded for the final one. So it's, I guess it's not a question of big or small. It's about making sure that they're linked and that they're building on each other, and that students can use the feedback from that assessment to on their last assessment. And we have a whole kind of philosophy around feedback, which is all about, you know, using positive language, right? So not focusing on what the student hasn't done, but what the student needs to do to bring it up to the next level. And I've developed a template for the marketing teams to use so that it's quite easy to do a summary of 3 key points that they need to do specifically. So it's very much about feed forward. So, and we have, you know, automated marking rubrics as well, which makes it easy as well to quickly mark. So I guess, does that answer your question, David?
Yeah, thank you. It does very much. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you very much, everyone. I think we are probably getting close to time, and it's probably appropriate to call to end the webinar over here. And first of all,